the way meritocracy, economic meritocracy, is played out in the United States, I do have a problem with, because I think it's a myth, or as I call it, I think it's a dead idea. And in that sense, I think not necessarily among everyday Americans, but I think among the what you might call the educated class, what I call the lower upper class in the book. I think there's a sense that's built up that people end up economically where they deserve to. And that's a function of the kind of long transition in our culture to the SAT-driven system of college admissions, the way that young people, from an early age sort of jump through those hoops. And if they're successful doing that, and they're successful gaining access to the best colleges, they sort of feel a kind of entitlement to the lion's share of the material rewards that society has to offer. And I think, put aside the fact that there's obviously no link between that kind of merit and any kind of dignity or moral, sense of worth in society, but I think it's also true, and I think lower uppers are increasingly realizing that there isn't a link between even merit in that sense, in that narrow sense, and who ends up the wealthiest or most powerful in society. You've got the rise of the undeserving ultra-rich, as I call it in the book, CEOs who end up presiding over the demolition of companies, like Charles Prince at Citigroup, or the fellow at Countrywide, or all these folks who walk away with $100 million, $200 million, while not only their companies are decimated and tens of thousands of people end up laid off, but the subprime mortgage peddlers are all retired to the country club now, while the entire country is going through the worst crisis since the Depression. So the question I ask is, how ubiquitous does this kind of undeserving wealth become before it becomes so corrosive in a democracy that it wrongly discredits capitalism altogether? So I think the lower uppers looking at that are realizing that money doesn't necessarily follow merit the way they'd quite assumed. And what I think is that as they look up and see that, and this is an important segment of society, these couple million people who are senior vice presidents of marketing, they're professors, they're media observers, they're professionals, lawyers, doctors, who themselves have become to chafe a little bit and see the sort of unimaginable wealth above them when they thought they themselves were positioned to be quite comfortable. And I think that the empathy that may awaken in them for the far greater group that's below them on the income scale will help them become a constituency for the kind of security and opportunity agenda we need for the country at a time of all this rapid economic change. I don't think it's fair to blame one party or another for this, and I suppose it's tempting to say somehow it's all a function of parenting, because somewhere along the line there was a kind of ethical compass and especially a leadership ethic that got lost. And I think that when I read the headlines every day, it's hard not to think that we're not seeing a failure of elites in every segment of society. I mean, whether it's Bernie Madoff abusing the trust. This is a guy who's chairman of the NASDAQ, a respected member of the Wall Street community, a bastion of the Jewish community. I mean, it's this kind of stuff is shocking. But the whole idea that you've got CEOs who walk away with gazillions while their companies absolutely go into the tank ought to shock us. And I'm actually surprised that there's not more political upheaval as a result of this. I think if the economic times get worse, I think there'll be more of a backlash, and there ought to be.